So I'm going to try something different with this build. Sometimes while I'm making my robots or other things, I'll come up with a backstory for them. You know, where they were built, where they came from, blah de blah. So I'd like to just take you on a journey. So I want you to draw the curtains closed, or if they already are, turn off the lights, settle back in your comfy chair, perhaps light a candle, or if for safety reasons you're not allowed anywhere near naked flames, a battery operated tea light. Just to set the mood, take a sip of your favourite beverage or alcoholic drink, and I'll begin. Once upon a time, as every fairy tale starts, in a land far, far away. But for legal reasons, we shall call this town Hope. There once was a young prince. Again, for legal reasons, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Anyway, the prince lived a lonely life. He had a job that paid the bills, but his real passion was to tinker away in his shed at the bottom of his garden, making robots of various sizes that he hoped one day would help shape the world. While he tinkered, he often thought about love and how he would someday meet his soulmate, how she would come crashing into his life and they would live happily ever after on a tiny island. But the prince slowly watched his 30s zoom by, to be followed quickly by his 40s. He sadly thought that the talk of love and soulmates was that of dreams and nothing more. So he kept plodding along in his dead-end job while at night making robots. All the while he felt his hopes and dreams ooze out of every pore of his very existence. But then, one fateful night, his world would soon turn inside out, upside down. The prince would often treat himself to a fish and chip tea after work every Friday night. And it was while he was shoveling another mouthful of fish into his gob, a rogue chip went down the wrong way, and suddenly, without warning, the prince began to choke. Bits of haddock and mushy, half-eaten chips flew out, hitting innocent bystanders as the prince frantically began beating his chest, trying to dislodge the blockage. People did as people do, and watched or threw money into his coffee cup, thinking he was a street artist performing some wild comedic dance. People laughed as the prince began to feel his world turning black, until he face-planted the floor with a sickening thud. When he awoke, the prince was staring into the bluest eyes he had ever seen. They reminded him of the ocean. The owner of the eyes had long blonde hair, and to avoid upsetting anyone, we shall just say her figure fitted the nurse's outfit she wore in all the right places, blah de blah de blah. She was a stunner. "My princess," the prince stuttered. The nurse smiled a killer smile that would have quite simply melted the ice cream in the Arctic. And she also didn't smell that bad either. She smelled of freshly cut roses. "Hey, mister," the nurse replied. No, hang on just a minute.
"Hey, mister,"
the nurse replied as she plumped up the pillows. The prince was lost for words. His heart pounded. Something inside him knew he had met his soulmate. Now the prince spent 2 days in hospital. The nurse, who we shall now call the princess, would often come and check in on him, and they soon hit it off. No, not that way. That would come later. For now, they would chat and laugh about random things, and the prince, all the while, started falling more and more in love with the princess. Now, unfortunately, the prince would soon learn that the princess was married to an evil king who only wanted her as a trophy wife to show off to the world. Saddened by this, the prince resigned himself to the fact his soulmate was spoken for. But before leaving hospital, the prince slipped her his phone number in case she ever wanted to chat or catch up. And so the prince went back to his non-existent life. Months later, while at work, the prince strangely bumped into the princess, who was looking for a new toaster. She explained in great detail how she broke the last toaster after throwing it in anger at the king, who had been drunk one night and had been a right pain in the arse, basically. The prince thought this was ironic, as she was someone who was supposed to save lives, not try to take them. Anyway, after a coffee, they both decided that they would keep in contact, and the princess promised that she would ring the prince soon. So it was while working in his shed late one night, a couple of weeks later after their last brief encounter, the prince was tinkering away at one of his many little robots when he heard a commotion and a crash and a screech of tyres, and his doorbell rang. Went his front doorbell. He opened it up and it was the princess standing in the doorway, clutching boxes and a suitcase. She'd explained to him through the tears that she'd left the king after another long argument, and so it was then when they decided to make a go of things, and they would start a new and wonderful life together. It was a torrid love affair, two star-crossed soulmates, loved up not to 10 but to 11, and without any broken kitchen appliances in sight. Now, this is usually how the happy story ends, how every fairy tale ends. The prince gets his princess, but no, this is my story. So after a few years, the king made an appearance, professing his love for his now ex-wife, and for the fact he didn't know how to make toast without a toaster. He hounded the couple. He made their life hell. He would bang on their doors late at night, go to the places of work, trying to get the prince to start a fight because he said he was the better man. Until one fateful day when the princess, for her sanity, she tore out the prince's heart by deciding to go back to the king. She made a promise to the prince that one day she would return, and just like that, she went. Now I know what you're thinking. His life free-falled into the dark abyss. He turned to drink, drugs, alcohol. No, not the prince. The prince continued to make his robots until one day some suits came from some fancy computer conglomerate wanting to buy all the patents for the robots he'd built so far. And so, with more money than the UK after Brexit, the prince packed his bags and bought a tiny island and lived there all alone, surrounded nothing by deep blue sea that reminded him of his princess. Now, before I go on, I know what you're thinking. What the hell does this have to do with this robotic turtle? I'm getting to it. Thank you for being patient. going to continue the fairy tale. The island was wonderful. It had everything the prince needed. But unfortunately, when buying the island, the brochure hadn't mentioned anything about ships that would often crash into the island. It seemed every other week some small, big, medium-sized boat would come crashing into the island. And it was one such ship that had crashed and nearly killed a turtle. Now the prince saved that turtle by adding robotic limbs to it. The turtle slowly grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and the prince kept adding and adding and adding more and more robotic things to the turtle, until the turtle got to an age where it couldn't see properly anymore. So he swapped the turtle's eyes out with big shining headlights. The turtle would walk the shoreline, and when spotting an approaching ship, turn on its searchlight eyes, steering the ships away from disaster and impending doom. Now this went on for a few more years, until slowly, while the prince was tinkering away, making one of his many robots, his soul dying inside from missing his princess, he in fact did die. Now I know what you're thinking. There was no nurse to save him this time. The prince had died from eating a pineapple. And it was quite ironic really, because it was the juice that had dripped onto an open circuit and zap, electrocuted him mid-bite. So the island is full of robots, and they're just moseying around, and the turtle is still walking around, shining his eyes into the night, steering the ships away from the island, until over time he starts slowly seizing up due to the salt air, until at one point he's unable to move. He could still shine his eyes into the night, and it was on such a night, while he steered another boat away from the island, that in the distance you could hear a mobile phone ringing. Who was ringing? Who was the caller? I'm going to leave that up to you. That's for you to decide. And what's the moral of the story? What could this fairy tale possibly offer any of you? Well, shit happens, kids. And to quote the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need. So, that's it. That's the fairy tale. That's how this robot build came about. So I just want to say, if you stuck it out this long, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the fairy tale. It's non-biographical. It was just a fairy tale that I'd thought up in my head while I was building this lighthouse tortoise. If for you, those people that do skip to the end bit, don't skip, because there's a Marvel ending. As always, thanks for watching, and hopefully if you like what you saw, tell your friends and hit all the right buttons. And until next time, I'll see you around. Did I mention there was a Marvel ending at the end of the credits? Stick around. Don't go skipping. Watch it at the end. What a load of shite. Fairy tales. My What? What are you doing? The build's finished. You need to go home. Go on. Bye. Bye.